Sometimes when you're designing a digital ad campaign, all the assets you need can be provided for you. Other times, you scour Shutterstock at 2 a.m. wondering if the perfect image was a cruel farce devised by the design gods. Regardless, there are some resources that I've found helpful to gather photography and fonts. It's natural to bounce between asset gathering and design until you find a solution that works for your concept. For photography, I sometimes use Unsplash, which is free. As you're looking through all these photography resources, you can either build a collection native to that service or you can pin them to your Pinterest board. For paid work, I also like to use Stocksy, which has a flat rate per size and you pay per image. Pro tip number 1, you'll save yourself some extra time photoshopping if you look for images that have seamless backgrounds. That way you can have them bleed into a solid color and resizing them will be a sitch. Pro tip number 2, using a sequence of images is great for creating a narrative in your design. One thing to keep in mind though is that I wouldn't go more than 3 images since it will give you a much higher file size. Since I do a lot of client work, it makes sense for me to have an Adobe Stock subscription. Here's the collection that I put together for some of my floof images. Pro tip number 3, embrace vector graphics wherever possible. We'll embed those into our project as SVGs and generally their file size is much lower. I'll show you some different ways of animating SVGs so that they can really come to life. You can wait until the next lesson to start developing your vector graphics, but just have it in mind that you're going to go for more of a vector look versus an image one. Or use vectors to enhance an image-based concept. Another important asset for developing your digital ads is typography. There are 2 different ways we can handle implementing typography into our animated digital designs. The first is LiveType. LiveType works by directly importing the font into Flexitive. LiveType is most appropriate when we want our type to be simple, streamlined, and adaptive. It's going to be directly editable so you can make changes right there in Flexitive. In order to use LiveType, you'll have to either have an OTF, a WAF, or a TTF file of your font. Or you can use a Google font. Google fonts by default are already loaded into Flexitive, so you can find them there without having to do any additional imports. The second way to incorporate typography in Flexitive is to use expanded type. Think of expanded type as type that you've created in Illustrator that could potentially use ligatures, type on a path, multiple fonts in one line. This can be more fancy and design type that you then export as an SVG and bring into Flexitive. An SVG is a vector graphic format, meaning that even though it's not LiveType, it's still going to scale really crisply. Because we're going to end up expanding this and bringing it in as a SVG, it doesn't really matter what our original font type is. For my project, I ended up using multiple fonts and incorporating both LiveType and SVGs. So either way, stick around and I got you covered. Regardless of which type format you choose, you need to make sure that you have the appropriate license for your font. For some more info on using type in Flexitive, I'm going to link to Flexitive's knowledge base in the class notes. For this class, a safe bet would be to stick to LostType and Google Fonts. LostType has a free personal use and demo license. Google Fonts are open source, so you won't have to worry about purchasing a license for those. If you like to incorporate some expanded type, feel free to use Adobe Fonts, Creative Market, whatever wacky font site you choose.